Hey guys, tonight we are heading back to a time of high adventure, epic sagas, and terrible food. We're going to explore why your diet would have absolutely sucked in the Viking Age. Forget what you've seen in the movies, the roaring fires, the long tables groaning under the weight of giant turkey legs, and the overflowing tankards of ale. The reality was far more grim. We're going to put you right in the middle of a Viking Age longhouse. And frankly, your first day is going to be rough. The food alone, let's just say your modern palate might not survive it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Go ahead and drop your city and the time in the comments below. It's always amazing to see this community stretch across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture the scene. It's the image burned into our collective consciousness. You're standing at the threshold of a great hall, the flickering torchlight casting long, dancing shadows on the timber walls. The air is thick with warmth, laughter, and the rich, savory smell of roasting meat. A chieftain, his beard braided with silver rings, raises a drinking horn high, his voice booming over the din. Before him, on trestle tables, are whole roasted pigs, glistening chickens, and bowls piled high with something. It's a scene of glorious, chaotic abundance, a celebration of a successful raid, perhaps, or a wedding that joins two powerful families. This is the grand Viking feast, the stuff of legend. You can almost feel the heat from the central fire pit on your face, the camaraderie of the warriors around you, the satisfying heft of a full belly. It's the reward for a life of hardship and daring. But let's just pause here for a moment to undie. This scene, as intoxicating as it is the highlight reel. It's the Instagram post of the Viking Age, carefully curated and presented to show only the very best moments. The mainstream historical consensus is that these massive feasts were real, but they were incredibly rare exceptions, not the daily rule. They were reserved for the most significant occasions: a chieftain's funeral, a religious festival like Jol to mark the winter solstice, or the triumphant return of a longship laden with treasure. For the average Viking farmer, a feast of this magnitude might be a once or twice in a lifetime event, if they were lucky enough to be invited at all. The sagas, those epic poems and stories that form much of our knowledge of the Vikings, were often written down centuries after the events they describe, by authors who had every reason to embellish and exaggerate the glory of their ancestors. So historians are still in a lively debate about just how grand these feasts truly were, and how often they actually occurred. Was every successful raid capped with a roasted boar, or was it more likely a shared pot of stew and some self-congratulatory boasting? Even within the feast itself, things were more structured and, in some ways, more bizarre than the simple image of a drunken free-for-all suggests. One of the core elements of a formal gathering was the Sumbiala ritual of toasting and oath-making. This wasn't just aimless drinking. It was a serious affair. The horn would be passed around, and with each drink, a person would make a toast. The first round might be to the gods, to Odin for victory, or Thor for strength. The next might be to the memory of great ancestors and fallen kings. Then came the personal boasts, where a warrior would stand and declare a great deed they planned to accomplish, to kill a rival, to sail to a new land, or to win a great treasure. These were not idle words, they were binding oaths, made publicly before the gods and one's peers. To fail in your oath was a source of immense shame. So, amidst the joyous chaos, there was this undercurrent of serious, ritualized social pressure. It was part party, part business meeting, and part religious ceremony, all lubricated with copious amounts of ale. But even here, at the peak of Viking culinary experience, let's not get carried away. The food, while plentiful, would still taste ancient. The meat would be gameway, cooked simply over an open flame, and almost certainly heavily salted to preserve it. The bread would be dense and flat. The vegetables, if any, would be boiled into submission. But the overwhelming sensation, the one thing that truly separates this fantasy from your reality, is that this moment is fleeting, warm spark in a long, cold, and hungry year. The story of what Vikings really ate isn't found here in the Great Hall, surrounded by the spoils of war. The true story begins the next morning, when the fires have died down and the leftovers have been picked clean. The true story of Viking food is one of relentless, grinding monotony. It's a story of survival, not indulgence. It's a story about the desperate, unending quest for calories in a harsh and unforgiving landscape. So let the warmth of this feast fade and feel the cool, damp air of the Scandinavian dawn begin to seep in. Your real journey is about to begin. You stir from a restless sleep, not because the sun is streaming through a window, there are no windows, but because the low fire in the center of the hall has been tended, and a fresh plume of smoke is rising to the roof. Your first breath of the day isn't crisp, clean, morning air. It's a thick, complex cocktail of smells. The primary note is smoke, of course, not the pleasant, aromatic smoke of a modern campfire, but the dense, acrid smoke of burning peat and damp wood, which stings your eyes and coats the back of your throat. It hangs in the air permanently, a constant fog that clings to your hair, your clothes, and your skin. Every day, you will wake up smelling like a bonfire. Mixed into that is the scent of dozens of unwashed bodies, sleeping close together for warmth, on raised wooden platforms that line the long walls. And beneath it all, another, more earthy aroma, the distinct, musty smell of livestock. Because in a Viking longhouse, you don't just live with your family, you live with your animals too. This is the reality of the longhouse, the central structure of Viking life. It's not a house in the modern sense, with separate rooms for different activities. It's one single, long, cavernous space. The heart of this space is the long fire, a shallow trench running down the center of the earthen floor, where fires are kept burning for cooking and warmth. There are no chimneys. Instead, a few small, shuttered openings high in the thatched or turf roof are supposed to let the smoke escape, supposed to being the operative phrase. In reality, they are woefully inadequate, creating a permanent smoky haze that settles at about head height. You learn quickly to stay low. The raised platforms on either side are your living quarters. This is where you sleep, work on crafts, and store your few personal belongings. Privacy is a concept that simply doesn't exist here. You are born, you live, and you will likely die within earshot and eyesight of 20, 30, maybe even 40 other people. But it's the animals that are the real surprise for your modern sensibilities. During the harsh Scandinavian winters, bringing the livestock, the cows, sheep, goats, and pigs inside the longhouse was a standard and sensible practice. It served a dual purpose. First, it protected the valuable animals from predators in the freezing cold. An ox or a milk cow was a huge investment, far too precious to be lost to a wolf or a blizzard. Second, the animal's body heat helped to warm the longhouse, supplementing the meager heat from the fire. So, as you lie there, you can hear the soft shuffling and lowing of a cow just a few feet away from where you sleep. The area for the livestock was usually at one end of the longhouse, often at a slightly lower level, but there were no permanent walls separating them from the human living space. Just a wicker partition, maybe, or nothing at all. Archaeologists and historians have a continuous debate about the level of hygiene in these longhouses. The romantic views suggests a rustic cleanliness, with floors swept daily in fresh rushes or hay laid down to absorb moisture and waste. The more cynical, and perhaps more realistic, view points to the evidence. Excavations of longhouse sites reveal floors made of compacted earth and clay, often darkened by centuries of accumulated soot, grease, and organic matter. They find the remains of insects, parasites, and the bones of mice and rats. While Vikings weren't intentionally living in squalor, our modern standards of cleanliness would be utterly alien to them. The concept of germ theory was 1,000 years away. The smell of animal manure mixed with cooking smoke was simply the smell of home. It was the smell of wealth, of survival. That cows breathing you here in the dark isn't a nuisance. It's a comforting reminder that you have milk, and therefore you have a chance of seeing the spring. So, use it up, swinging your legs off the wooden platform. The floor is cold and damp under your feet. The air is hazy, and through the gloom, you see the shapes of your family, your neighbors, and your farm animals all beginning to stir in the dim morning light. Someone is already tending a pot over the central fire. The smell of breakfast is beginning to cut through the other household aromas. But this isn't the smell of sizzling bacon or fresh coffee. It's a simple, starchy smell. It's the smell of survival. And as your stomach crumbles, you realize with a sinking feeling that you already know what's in that pot. You had it yesterday. You'll have it tomorrow. It's the fuel that powers the Viking Age, a fuel made not of glory, but of grim necessity. Your journey into the Viking diet begins not with a choice, but with an inevitability. Your daily life isn't driven by ambition, or glory, or the grand designs of chieftains. It's driven by a single, gnawing, relentless imperative: the acquisition of calories. Every single activity, from mending a fence to sharpening a tool, is measured against this fundamental need. You exist in a state of constant, low-level energy conservation. You don't waste movement. You don't engage in activity for its own sake. The world outside the smoky warmth of the longhouse is a beautiful but harsh landscape of fjords, forests, and mountains that doesn't give up its resources easily. Every calorie you consume has been hard-won, either from your own back-breaking labor or that of your family. And every calorie you expend is a debit from that precious, hard-won account. This is the central, unglamorous truth of your existence. You are, in essence, a hunter-gatherer and a subsistence farmer, locked in an eternal struggle against entropy. The entire rhythm of the Viking year is dictated by this struggle. The seasons don't just bring changes in weather, they bring a radical shift in your daily tasks and your level of anxiety. Spring is a frantic race against time. As soon as the ground thaws, you are out in the fields from sunrise to sunset, preparing the soil and planting your meager crops of barley, oats, and rye. Your muscles ache, your hands are raw, but you can't stop. A delay of a week could mean the difference between a successful harvest and a winter of starvation. Summer offers a brief, glorious respite. The days are long, the sun is warm, and the landscape is suddenly, miraculously abundant. This is the time for foraging, for fishing in the fjords, for repairing the longhouse, and for a select few, for going a Viking raiding, which was, at its core, another, more violent form of resource acquisition. But even at the height of summer, the shadow of winter looms. The primary activity is not just enjoying the plenty, but preserving it. Every berry you pick, every fish you catch, every bundle of hay you cut is one more stone in the fortress you are building against the coming cold. You are constantly drying, salting, smoking, and fermenting, desperately trying to lock in the summer's bounty before it rots. Then comes autumn and the harvest. This is the most critical moment of the year. The entire community works together, bringing in the grain and slaughtering the excess livestock that you can't afford to feed through the winter. A good harvest means a celebration. A poor harvest means a quiet, gnawing fear that settles over the longhouse like the winter snows. And then winter arrives. The world outside shrinks. The ground freezes solid. The fjords ice over. And the sky turns a permanent, slate gray. Your world becomes the smoky interior of the longhouse. Life slows to a crawl. This is a time for mending tools, weaving cloth, and telling stories around the fire. But mostly, it's a time of waiting and rationing. You watch your food stores with an eagle eye, measuring out the salted fish and dried meat, counting the barrels of grain. Every meal is a calculated risk. Eat too much now, and you'll starve in the hunger moon before the spring thaw. The historical term for this period, in Old Norse, gives us a clue to its nature, a time of indoor sitting. It sounds cozy, but it was a period fraught with tension, boredom, and the constant, low-grade fear of scarcity. A fascinating cold case study by archaeologists in the field of bioarchaeology examines the skeletons of Viking Age people, and they tell a story of this constant grind. They find evidence of incredible physical strength, especially in the upper bodies of both men and women, a testament to a life of hard manual labor, rowing, chopping wood, grinding grain by hand. But they also find evidence of hardship. They see lines of arrested development in the teeth, known as enamel hypoplasia, which indicate periods of severe malnutrition or disease during childhood. They find high rates of degenerative joint disease, a consequence of a lifetime of physical toil. They even find evidence of healed bone fractures, suggesting a life where injuries were common but not necessarily fatal. Your body is a tool, and it bears the marks of its use. There's an ongoing debate among scholars about the average life expectancy. While some argue that if you survived childhood, you had a decent chance of reaching your 40 seconds or 50 seconds, others point to the skeletal evidence and suggest that life was, for most, short and brutal. Your body is a living record of your struggle for calories, a struggle that leaves no part of you unmarked. The grand sagas speak of heroes and kings, but your bones tell the true, unwritten story of the Viking Age, a story of survival against the odds. Your day begins and, in all likelihood, ends with a bowl of something warm and gray. This is your fuel, the very foundation of your diet. It's not a choice, it's a constant. The pot that sits over the long fire almost perpetually contains some form of porridge or gruel. You call it grauti, or it's the single most important dish in the Viking world, the caloric bedrock upon which everything else is built. Forget the idea of a varied breakfast. There are no options. There is only the pot. Ladle a serving into your simple wooden bowl, and find a place to sit on the edge of your sleeping platform. Utterly, profoundly bland. It has the texture of thick, lumpy wallpaper, paste, and the taste of boiled grain and smoke. There is no sugar, no honey, no fruit mixed in. Those are precious commodities, reserved for special occasions or for flavoring the ale. Your daily grauti are as unadorned, a functional delivery system for carbohydrates. The base of this porridge is whatever grain is available. Most commonly, it's barley, as it's a hardy crop that can withstand the cool, damp Scandinavian climate. Oats are also used, and sometimes rye. Wheat is a rarity, a luxury crop grown in the richer soils of the south, like in Denmark. For you, it's barley. The grain itself is coarse. The primary tool for processing it is the quern stone, a simple hand mill made of two circular stones. It's a physically demanding, time-consuming task, usually performed by the women of the household, or by thralls, the enslaved people at the bottom of Viking society. You spend hours every day kneeling, pushing the top stone round and round, grinding the dried barley into a rough flour. The flour is never as fine as the powdery stuff you'd find in a modern supermarket. It's gritty, and often contains tiny stone fragments from the quern, which will gradually wear down your teeth over a lifetime. Once the grain is ground, the process is simple. You mix the flour with water, or perhaps weigh the thin, watery liquid left over from cheese making, and heat it in the cauldron over the fire. You stir it with a wooden paddle, scraping the bottom to prevent it from scorching, though it often does anyway, adding a bitter, burnt flavor to the mix, and that's it. That's your meal. Sometimes, for a bit of variety, you might toast the grains before grinding them, which adds a slightly nutty flavor. On a good day, you might have a spoonful of soured milk or a knob of butter to stir into it, adding a welcome tang of fattened flavor. But most days, it is just grain and water. This porridge-based diet is a historical reality confirmed by extensive archaeological evidence. At Viking settlement sites like the one at Jorvik, in modern-day York, England, Archaeologists have analyzed the contents of cesspit and even fossilized human feces or coprolites. It's not glamorous work, but it provides an incredibly detailed picture of what people were actually eating. And what they find, again and again, are the indigestible husks of cereal grains, barley, oats, right? The evidence is overwhelming. They also find the seeds of various weeds that commonly grew in the grain fields, like corn cockle, which tells them that the grain wasn't cleaned as thoroughly as it is today. So your bowl of groutier might have the added texture of a few stray weed seeds. A bit of a historical debate still simmers around just how monotonous this diet was. Some scholars argue that while porridge was the staple, Vikings were resourceful foragers and would have supplemented their gruel with whatever herbs and wild greens were in season. Others maintain that for the bulk of the year, especially the long winter, the diet was as relentlessly repetitive as the evidence suggests. The most fascinating, and perhaps most disgusting, little detail about your porridge is its continuous nature. The cauldron was rarely, if ever, emptied and scrubbed clean. Instead, it was a perpetual stew. You'd eat your share for the morning meal, and whatever was left would remain in the pot. Later in the day, you'd add more water, more grain, and maybe some chopped up vegetables or scraps of fish to create a thicker evening stew. The leftover stew would form the base for the new day's porridge. This perpetual pot system was energy efficient. You never had to waste fuel bringing a full pot of cold water, but it also meant that the flavors of days and weeks past would mingle and ferment in the cauldron. The pot itself would develop a sourdough quality, a unique, tangy flavor profile born of old food and lingering bacteria. So as you take another spoonful of your bland, smoky, gritty porridge, you can take some small comfort in the knowledge that you are also tasting the ghosts of every meal you've eaten for the past month. If you're lucky, you'll have something to slop on top of your morning groutier. It's a thick, white, lumpy substance with a powerfully sour smell that makes your nose wrinkle. This is skyr, but you must immediately banish the modern image you have of this food. The skyr you might find in a supermarket today is a creamy, mild, high-proteined, airy product, often sweetened and blended with fruit. It's a health food, a treat. The skyr in your bowl is a different beast entirely. It's a product of pure necessity, a crude but effective method of preserving milk in an age before refrigeration. Its primary characteristic is not its creamy texture or its health benefits, but its intense, almost searing soreness. It's a functional food designed to last, not to please the palate. The process of making skyr begins with the most valuable resource on your farm, a milk cow. After the morning milking, the fresh milk is brought into the longhouse. A portion of it is consumed fresh, a rare treat especially for the children. The rest is destined for preservation. You gently heat the milk over the fire, not to a boil, but just until it's warm. Then, you add the magic ingredient, a spoonful of skyr from the previous batch. This acts as a starter culture, introducing the specific bacteria needed for fermentation. You cover the pot with a cloth and leave it in a relatively warm spot in the longhouse for a day or so. During this time, the bacteria get to work, consuming the lactose in the milk and producing lactic acid. This is what gives skyr its characteristics are taste and, more importantly, what preserves it. The high acidity creates an environment where harmful, spoilage-causing bacteria cannot thrive. Once the milk has curdled and thickened, the process isn't over. You then pour the mixture into a cloth bag and hang it, allowing the thin, watery whey to slowly drip out. And the resulting whey is not discarded. It's a valuable byproduct, full of nutrients, which will be used as the liquid for the next batch of porridge or simply drunk on its own. What's left in the bag is the skyr, a dense, concentrated, almost cheese-like substance. It's tangy and has a grainy texture that is a far cry from its modern, smooth counterpart. It is, however, packed with protein and fat, a vital supplement to your carbohydrate-heavy diet of porridge. The historical significance of skyr and other fermented dairy products is a subject of great interest to food historians. For a population in northern Europe, where long winters made year-round grazing impossible, preserving the bounty of summer milk was a matter of life and death. Fermentation was the key. While the specific origins of sky are debated, with some historians arguing it was brought to Iceland by the first Norse settlers, while others believe it was a common practice across Scandinavia, its importance is undisputed. It represents a sophisticated, pre-scientific understanding of microbiology. Vikings didn't know about Lactobacillus or Streptococcus thermophilus, but they knew that adding a bit of old sky or to new milk would create more skyr, or it was a form of folk science passed down through generations that allowed them to survive. A little known and rather unappetizing fact is how skyr was often stored for the long winter. Once the whey was pressed out, the thick skyr would be packed tightly into wooden barrels or clay pots, but to preserve it for months on end. Another ingredient was sometimes added butter. A thick layer of butter would be spread over the top of the skyr, creating an airtight seal that prevented mold and other contaminants from getting in. This butter would often turn rancid over time, developing a strong, cheesy, and pungent flavor. When it was time to eat the sky, or in the depths of winter, you would first have to scrape off this layer of foul-smelling, aged butter. Sometimes, this bog butter, as it's sometimes called by archaeologists who find preserved samples in peat bogs, was considered a delicacy in its own right, prized for its intense flavor. So as you spoon that lump of searingly sour sky onto your bland porridge, you're not just getting a hit of protein, you're participating in an ancient chemical process, a testament to your ancestors' ingenuity. It might make your mouth pucker and your eyes water, but it's one of the key reasons you're still alive. Beyond the endless porridge and the sour skyr, there is another flavor that tastes so pervasive it seasons almost everything you eat. It's the taste of salt and the taste of the sea. Lining the rafters of your longhouse, hanging from wooden hooks, are rows and rows of dried, salted fish. They are stiff as boards, their skin a dull, silvery gray, their eyes cloudy and vacant. This is your primary source of protein for most of the year. This is SKRE, or stock fish. It's not just food, it's a form of currency, a staple commodity that powered the Viking trade network. And for you, it's a dietary inevitability. The smell is a permanent part of your home, a faint, fishy, salty aroma that mingles with the smoke and the livestock. The process of making stock fish is brutally simple and relies entirely on the cold, clean air of the North Atlantic. In the late winter and early spring, the cod fishing season reaches its peak. You and the other men of your village will take to the icy waters in your small boats, fishing relentlessly. The cod are brought ashore, where the work of preservation begins immediately. You gut the fish and, depending on the tradition, either behead them or tie them together in pairs by their tails. Then, you hang them on huge wooden racks, called H-gel, which are exposed to the wind and the cold. There they will hang for up to 3 months. The freezing temperatures and the dry wind work a kind of magic, slowly desiccating the fish, drawing out all the moisture without allowing it to rot. The final product is a piece of fish that has lost nearly 80% of its water content and has the consistency of a wooden plank. It's almost entirely pure protein, and if kept dry, it can last for years. When it comes time to eat this mummified fish, you can't just throw it on the fire. Preparing stock fish is a laborious process in itself. First, you have to rehydrate it. The most common method is to beat it with a wooden mallet or the back of an axe, which helps to break down the tough muscle fibers. This process could take a while, filling the longhouse with a rhythmic, percussive thwack, thwack, thwack after the beating. The fish is soaked in water for several days, with the water being changed periodically. Only after all this effort does the fish become soft enough to be cooked, usually by boiling it in the perpetual cauldron, adding its fishy essence to the communal stew. The historical impact of stock fish on the Viking world is difficult to overstate. This was not just peasant food, it was a cornerstone of their economy. The abundance of cod in the waters around Norway and Iceland created a massive surplus of this highly portable, non-perishable protein. Viking traders would load their long ships with bundles of stockfish and sail to ports in England, mainland Europe, and even the Byzantine Empire, trading it for goods they culled and produced themselves, like wheat, wine, and silver. Historians still debate the full extent of this trade, but archaeological finds of Norse-style fish, hooks and processing sites far from Scandinavia's suggest it was a vast and sophisticated network. In a way, the Viking Age was built on a foundation of dried cod. It fueled their voyages, paid for their luxuries, and sustained their populations through the lean times. Of course, the other primary method of preserving fish was salting. This was more common for fatty fish like herring, which couldn't be air-dried as effectively as lean cod. The fish would be gutted, and then layered in a barrel with coarse sea salt. The salt would draw out the moisture and create a brine that preserved the fish. The result was a product that was intensely salty with a soft, almost mushy texture. So, your protein options are not fresh or frozen. They are rock-hard and bland or salty and soft. The taste of the sea is always on your tongue, but it's not the fresh, briny taste of an oyster. It's the aggressive, overpowering taste of preservation. As you chew on a piece of rehydrated, boiled cod, flakes of which have been mixed into your evening stew, you can appreciate its life-giving protein. But you also can't help but dream of a fish that was caught and cooked on the same day, a luxury so rare it feels like a fantasy. Every now and then, you get a break from the monotony of porridge. You get to eat bread. But you must immediately dispel any romantic notions of a warm, crusty, hearth-baked loaf. The bread of your time is a different thing entirely. It's functional, dense, and, more often than not, incredibly hard. It's another vehicle for grain, a portable and durable foodstuff that serves a purpose but offers little in the way of sensual pleasure, baked on a griddle or directly on the hot stones of the hearth. It's unleavened, meaning it contains no yeast or other raising agent, resulting in a finished product that is more like a thick, heavy cracker or a piece of hardtack than what you would recognize as bread today. The process is straightforward. You take your coarsely ground barley or oat flour, the same gritty stuff you use for your grout-y, and mix it with water and a pinch of salt to form a stiff dough. You knead it for a bit on a floured wooden board, then shape it into rough, circular discs. These are then placed onto a hot, flat piece of iron, nor stone that sits over the embers of the fire. There's no oven, no controlled temperature. You cook it by sight, flipping it once, the bottom is browned and slightly blistered. The result is a disc of bread that is often slightly burnt on the outside and still a little dense and doughy on the inside. It has a simple, nutty flavor from the grain, but its defining characteristic is its texture tough, chewy, and requiring a good deal of effort from your jaw. This type of simple flatbread was the daily standard for most people. However, there is archaeological unwritten evidence of other types of bread, particularly for more festive occasions. The Vikings did understand the principle of leavening, using either a sort of starter or, more commonly, the dregs from the bottom of an ale brewing barrel, which contained active yeast. This would have produced a lighter, more airy loaf, something closer to what we think of as bread, but yeast was a byproduct of brewing, and brewing was a time-consuming and resource-intensive process. So, leavened bread was a luxury, not an everyday item. It was the bread of chieftains, the bread of feasts. Your bread is the hard, unleavened cracker that you can stick in your pouch and chew on while you're out mending a fence. One of the more interesting debates among historians and experimental archaeologists revolves around the additives that might have been mixed into the bread dough. The sagas mention various ingredients. For example, The poetic edit describes a scene where a wise woman warns a hero to be wary of ale that might be poisoned, and to check his bread, implying that nefarious things could be baked into a loaf. On a more practical level, it's believed that various seeds, like linseed or even the seeds of certain weeds from the fields, might have been added for extra nutrition and flavor. The most controversial and debated additive is dried, ground field peas. Some sources suggest that pea flour was a common ingredient, used to bulk out the more valuable grain flour, add a boost of protein. Skeptics argue that pea flour would have been difficult to produce and would have altered the texture of the bread significantly. It remains a point of contention: was your daily flat bread a simple grain and water affair, or a more complex, protein-enriched, and possibly less palatable concoction? The most unappealing aspect of your bread, however, is not its hardness but its companions. Your grain stores, typically large wooden chests or clay-lined pits, are a constant battleground. They are dark, often slightly damp, and an irresistible draw for insects. Weevils are a common problem. These tiny beetles infest the grain, laying their eggs inside the kernels. When you grind your flour, you are often grinding the weevils along with it, adding a small, almost unabateable, but definite source of extra protein to your dough. Mold is another constant threat, especially in the damp climate. A patch of mold might be scraped off the top of the grain supply, but the spores would have penetrated deep into the container. This could lead to a bitter, musty taste in the bread and, in the worst cases, could be toxic. So as you bite down on your hard, smoky flatbread, hearing that satisfying crunch, you can never be entirely sure if that crunch is coming from a particularly well-toasted piece of barley, a stray bit of grit from the quernstone, or the desiccated exoskeleton of a weevil. It's all just part of the texture. Let's talk about your kitchen. Forget the modern concept of a dedicated room with countertops, a sink, and stainless steel appliances. Your kitchen is not a room, it's a location. It is the lingo du, or the long fire, that smoldering trench of embers running down the center of your shin, and cooking takes place in the very heart of your crowded, smoky, multi-purpose living space. The entire environment is a culinary obstacle course, and every meal you prepare is seasoned with the unavoidable flavors of your surroundings: ash, soot, and dirt. The primary piece of cooking equipment is a large iron cauldron, suspended from the rafters by a chain. The height of this cauldron can be adjusted to control the cooking temperature, lower for a rapid boil, higher for a slow simmer. This is the workhorse of your kitchen, the home of the perpetual porridge and stew. For other tasks, you have simpler tools. A flat, iron griddle or a large, smooth stone can be placed directly onto the hot embers to cook your flatbreads. Smaller clay pots might be set near the edge of the fire to warm liquids or cook smaller quantities of food. Spits made of either iron or green wood are used for the rare occasion when you have a piece of meat large enough to roast. And that's about it. It's a simple, robust, and entirely open-air system, if you can call the smoky interior of the longhouse open air. Hygiene, as you might imagine, is a constant struggle. There is no running water. Water has to be hauled in wooden buckets from the nearest well or stream. It's a precious resource, used sparingly. You don't have a sink with a drain. You have a slop bucket in the corner. When you're preparing food, your work surface is a simple wooden board, or perhaps just a designated clean area of the dirt floor. Animals, chickens, dogs, and the occasional curious goat from the livestock end of the house are a constant presence. Wandering freely through your cooking space, a dog might snatch a dropped piece of food, or a chicken might peck at spilled grain. It's a chaotic, unsanitary environment by modern standards. One of the most defining characteristics of your food is the taste of smoke, since the fire is directly beneath the cauldron, and the entire house is filled with a permanent haze. It's impossible to cook anything that doesn't become infused with the flavor of whatever you're burning. On a good day, you might be burning seasoned hardwood like oak or birch, which imparts a relatively pleasant, smoky flavor. On a bad day, when wood is scarce, you might be burning dried peat, animal dung, or damp, green wood, which produces a thick, acrid smoke that makes your food taste bitter and tarry. Furthermore, ash is a constant companion. A gust of wind through the open door, or someone stoking the fire too vigorously, can send a cloud of fine gray ash billowing up into the air, which then settles like a fine dust over everything, including the food in the cooking pot. Your stew isn't just a stew with a delicate seasoning of airborne ash and soot. Food historians and archaeologists have long debated the sophistication of Viking cooking. The traditional view, supported by the simplicity of the cooking setup, is that it was basic and functional, focused on boiling and roasting with little in the way of complex flavorings. However, more recent discoveries have challenged this a bit. For instance, at some high-status sites, they have found evidence of imported spices, like black pepper, and even the remains of what appear to be dedicated kitchen areas separate from the main living space, suggesting that the wealthy may have enjoyed a more refined culinary experience. A particularly curious find has been the discovery of what are believed to be hot stone cooking pits. In this method, stones are heated in the main fire until they are glowing hot, then carefully placed into a pit lined with leaves, along with wrapped parcels of food. The pit is then sealed with more leaves and earth, and the residual heat from the stones slowly cooks the food inside. This is essentially a primitive underground oven, which would have allowed for baking and slow roasting without the constant exposure to smoke and ash. For you, however, living in a standard longhouse, this is a distant fantasy. Your food comes from the smoky cauldron, and you've learned to accept the taste of ash is just another part of the flavor profile. It's the taste of home. As summer wanes and the days begin to shorten, a quiet urgency settles over your household. The harvest is in, but the real work has just begun. Now, you must transform this pile of perishable food into something that can withstand the long, dark siege of winter. Your survival depends on your mastery of one crucial art, the art of drying. In a world without canning or refrigeration, desiccation is your primary weapon against decay. The rafters of your longhouse, already home to the stockfish, will soon be joined by a host of other hanging, shriveling foodstuffs, turning the smoky space into a giant, edible pantry. The most important items to be preserved are the meat and the fish. After the autumn slaughter, you have a sudden but temporary surplus of meat, mutton, goat, pork, and beef. You eat some of it, fresh in a rare and joyous feast, but the vast majority must be preserved. The simplest method is wind drying, the same technique used for the stockfish. You cut the meat into long, thin strips, making sure to trim off as much fat as possible, as fat is prone to going rancid. You then hang these strips high in the rafters, where the smoky, dry air of the longhouse can circulate around them. Over weeks and months, the meat will slowly lose its moisture, becoming hard, dark, and leathery. This is your scare pick JT, your dried mutton or goat, a vital source of protein for the winter. Fish, especially the fatty herring and mackerel that can't be made into stockfish, are also dried, but often with the help of smoke. Small, dedicated smokehouses, little huts with a smoldering fire and no chimney, are sometimes used, but it's just as common to simply hang the fish directly over the long fire in the house. The constant, thick smoke not only helps to dry the fish but also deposits a layer of anti-abricable compounds on its surface, adding an extra layer of protection against bacteria and mold. The result is a piece of fish that is not only dry but also deeply infused with a pungent, smoky flavor that can be almost overpowering. But it's not just meat and fish. You dry everything you possibly can. Herbs gathered from the meadows are tied into bundles and hung to dry, to be used later for medicinal purposes or as a rare flavoring for your stews. Wild berries, like bilberries and lingon berries, are spread out on wooden rails and left in a warm, dry spot to slowly shrivel into sweet, chewy little nuggets. Even some vegetables, particularly hardy root vegetables like turnips, can be thinly sliced and strung up on cords to dry. The longhouse, an autumnal landscape of hanging things. a testament to your foresight and your fear of the coming winter. The science behind this is simple, even if you don't understand it. Microorganisms like bacteria and mold, the agents of decay, need water to live and multiply. By removing the water from the food, you put them into a state of suspended animation. The food doesn't rot because the things that cause rot can't function. Historians continue to debate the effectiveness of these methods and the palatability of the final product. While drying is effective, it's not foolproof. A particularly damp autumn could lead to mold growth before the food is fully dried. And there's the ever-present issue of pests. Flies would be a constant nuisance during the drying process, and you'd have to be vigilant to prevent them from laying their eggs on your precious winter stores. A particularly gross but fascinating detail from some historical accounts suggests that it was not uncommon to find dried maggots or fly-blown spots on the finished product, which were simply scraped off before consumption. When it comes time to eat this dried food, it requires significant preparation. Like the stock fish, the dried meat is often rock hard. You might have to gnaw on a piece of it like a dog on a bone, your saliva slowly softening it enough to be chewed. More commonly, you'll chop off a chunk with an axe and add it to the simmering cauldron, where it will slowly rehydrate and lend its tough, smoky, and intensely savory flavor to the communal stew. The dried berries are a rare treat, a burst of concentrated sweetness that you might chew on as a snack or, if you're feeling generous, stir into your morning porridge. As you look up at the smoky rafters, at the rows of desiccated food hanging like strange, edible bats, you don't see a larder of delicious ingredients. You see a wall of security. Each piece of dried meat, each string of shriveled apples, is a small victory against the looming specter of winter starvation. Your battle against hunger is a two-front war. On one front, you fight to acquire and preserve enough food to last the year. On the other, you wage a constant, close-quarters battle against the tiny, insidious forces that are trying to steal it from you. Your food stores, no matter how carefully prepared, are an open invitation to a host of unwelcome guests. Your daily life involves a persistent, low-grade conflict with mold, weevils, mice, and rats. These creatures are not just a nuisance, they are a direct threat to your survival, capable of turning your hard one-winter pantry into a foul, inedible mess. The most insidious enemy is one you can barely seem old. In the damp climate of Scandinavia, mold is a relentless foe. It thrives in the cool, dark corners of your longhouse. You see it as a fuzzy, greenish blue or black powder that appears on your stored food. It might start on a piece of dried meat that wasn't fully desiccated, or on a loaf of bread stored in a slightly damp chest. Your first line of defense is simply to scrape it off. You take a knife and carefully cut away the offending patch, hoping you've removed it all. But you don't understand that the visible mold is just the fruiting body of a much larger, invisible network of fungal threads that have already penetrated deep into the food. So, even after scraping, your food often retains a distinct, musty, and bitter taste of flavor of mold. Then there are the insects. Your grain bins are a particular hotbed of activity. As we've touched upon, grain weevils are a fact of life. You accept their presence as inevitable. When you scoop out grain to grind for your porridge or bread, you don't bother trying to pick them out. They are simply ground along with the grain. In fact, some historians have jokingly argued that weevils might have been a significant, if unintentional, source of protein and fat in the Viking diet. The academic community continues to analyze coprolites' fossilized feces to determine the full extent of insect consumption, but the evidence strongly suggests it was commonplace. The presence of weevils was so normal that it likely wouldn't have even registered as something unpleasant. It was just part of the grain. The larger pests are a more obvious problem. My sunrats are drawn to the longhouse for the same reasons you are warmth and food. They are a constant, scurrying presence in the shadows, their tiny claws making scratching sounds in the walls and rafters at night. They are not just thieves, Nibbling away at your precious stores, they're also agents of contamination, spoiling what they don't eat with their droppings and urine. Your defense against them is a cat. Almost every longhouse has a cat, not as a cuddly pet, but as a working animal, a furry little pest control specialist. A good mouser is a valuable asset to the household, earning its keep in the grain it protects. The reverence for cats is even hinted at in Norse mythology. The goddess Freyja's chariot is famously pulled by two large cats, suggesting their importance and almost magical status. The methods for storing food were a direct response to this onslaught of pests. Grain was often stored in pits dug into the floor of the longhouse, lined with clay and sealed with a heavy stone lid to keep rodents out. Dried meat and fish were hung high in the rafters, making them harder for mice to reach. A particularly clever, though debated, storage method involves what is known as bog butter. As mentioned, butter was a valuable source of fat, but it goes rancid quickly when exposed to air. To preserve it, you would pack it into a wooden container or wrap it in animal hides and then bury it deep within a peat bog. The unique chemistry of the bog, low temperature, low oxygen, and high acidity prevented the butter from spoiling in the traditional, moldy way. Instead, it underwent a different chemical transformation, developing a sharp, cheesy, almost pungent flavor and a waxy texture. Archaeologists have found numerous examples of this bog butter, some of them hundreds or even thousands of years old. While some scholars argue these were simply ritual offerings, many believe it was a practical, if rather extreme, method of long-term food storage. So when you dig up a lump of this bog butter to add some fat to your winter stew, its powerful, almost offensive taste is the flavor of victory over the forces of decay and the tiny creatures that haunt your pantry. It's a battle you have to win, one spoonful at a time. There is one flavor that dominates your world more than any other. It's not the smokiness of the fire, the blandness of the porridge, or even the soreness of the sky, or it is the sharp, aggressive, and utterly inescapable taste of salt. Salt is not merely a seasoning for you, it is a fundamental to love survival, the single most important technology in your food preservation arsenal. It is the chemical shield that stands between your family and starvation. Consequently, almost every savory food you eat that isn't fresh from the field or the fjord is saturated with it. Your palate has become accustomed to a level of salinity that would be shocking to a modern tongue. You crave it, you depend on it, and it makes everything taste, well, the same. The acquisition of salt is a major undertaking. In some coastal areas, you can produce it by simply boiling seawater, a long and fuel-intensive process. You fill a large cauldron with seawater and boil it for hours, slowly reducing it until only the crystalline salt deposits are left behind. In other regions, particularly in Denmark and parts of England, there are salt marshes where the tides leave behind pools of briny water that evaporate in the sun, leaving a crust of salt that can be harvested. This salt is rarely the pure, white, free-flowing substance you'd recognize today. It's coarse, grayish, and often mixed with sand, dirt, and other mineral impurities, giving it a slightly bitter or metallic aftertaste. But it is precious, a commodity as valuable as iron or silver. In fact, the control of salt production sites was a major source of wealth and power for many chieftains. The primary use for all this salt is, of course, preservation. For fatty fish like herring and salmon, which cannot be air-dried into stock fish, salting is the only option. The fish are gutted and then packed in barrels with a generous layer of salt between each layer of fish. The salt works its magic through osmosis, drawing the water out of the fish's cells and creating a brine so concentrated that bacteria cannot survive in it. This process, known as salting in brine, preserves the fish for months or even years. The same method is used for meat. After the autumn slaughter, large cuts of pork and beef are submerged in a strong brine solution in a large wooden raft or barrel. This corned meat from the corns or large grains of salt used becomes your staple protein for the winter. The consequence of this preservation method is that your food is incredibly salty. Before you can eat the salted fish or meat, you often have to soak it in fresh water for a day or more to draw out some of the excess salt. But the process is never perfect. The food retains a powerful, penetrating saltiness that tends to overwhelm many of the meats or fish's natural flavor. When you add a chunk of this salt pork to your evening stew, its primary contribution to the flavor profile is salt. It seasons the entire pot, making the vegetables, the grains, and everything else taste predominantly of brine. There is a fascinating ongoing discussion among historians about the health implications of such a high sodium diet. Skeletal remains from the Viking Age often show evidence of conditions like hypertension and cardiovascular disease, which modern medicine links to excessive salt intake. However, it's a complex issue. A life of hard physical labor means you would be sweating a great deal, losing salt that needs to be replenished. The overall diet was low in the processed sugars and unhealthy fats that exacerbate the negative effects of sodium in modern diets. So, were the Vikings slowly pickling themselves from the inside out, or was their physically demanding lifestyle a counterbalance that allowed them to tolerate a level of salt that would be dangerous for a modern office worker? The academic jury is still out, but it's a stark reminder that what constitutes a healthy diet is entirely dependent on the context of a person's life. A little-known side effect of the salt-heavy diet is a constant, nagging thirst. You are always drinking water, whey, or the weak, low-alcohol ale that is a staple of your household. The salt makes you crave liquid, and it's a cycle that never ends. So as you sit down to your evening meal, thus to that tastes powerfully of salt pork and smoke, you reach for your drinking horn. The food provides the calories, but it's the salt that drives the rhythm of your consumption, dictating not just what you eat, but how much you must drink to wash it all down. You have another essential food item stored away for the winter, a source of concentrated energy and fat that you guard jealously. It's butter, but once again, you must set aside your modern expectations. The butter you know is a fresh, creamy, sweet product kept refrigerated and enjoyed for its delicate flavor. Your butter is a different entity altogether. It's a tool for survival, a block of preserved calories, and by the time you eat it in the depths of winter, it has often acquired a taste that is charitably described as strong. More accurately, it is the unmistakable, pungent, and cheesy taste of rancidity. The process of making butter is simple and ancient. You take the cream that rises to the top of the milk and churn it. Your churn is not a fancy, hand-cranked device. It is a tall, narrow wooden vessel called an ash churn. You pour the cream inside, place a lid on top with a hole in the center, and then insert a long wooden staff with a small paddle or disc at the bottom. Then you begin to push the staff up and down over and over again. It's a monotonous, physically demanding task that can take an hour or more. As you agitate the cream, the fat globules begin to clump together, separating from the liquid, which is buttermilk. The buttermilk is drained off a valuable, tangy drink in its own right, and the clumps of fat are gathered and pressed together to form a block of butter. The problem is preservation. Fresh butter, exposed to air and room temperature, spoils very quickly. The fats begin to oxidize, a chemical process that produces compounds with strong, unpleasant odors and flavors. This is rancidity. To combat this, you salt the butter heavily. The salt acts as a preservative, slowing down the microbial activity that contributes to spoilage. This salted butter is then packed into wooden tubs or clay pots for storage. But even with the salt, the process of rancidification is not stopped, only slowed. Over the months of winter storage in the longhouse, your butter will inevitably develop that characteristic sharp, tangy, almost blue cheese-like flavor. This taste was not necessarily seen as a flaw. In a world of bland porridge and salty meat, the strong flavor of aged, rancid butter might have been a welcome, if aggressive, addition to a meal. A small knob of this pungent butter stirred into your grout beer would provide a powerful burst of flavor and a much-needed dose of fat. You would spread it on your hard flatbread, its sharp taste cutting through the simple nuttiness of the grain. It was a condiment as much as a source of calories. Historians and food scientists are still debating the degree to which this taste was accepted or even prized. Was it simply tolerated as an unavoidable consequence of long-term storage? Or was it, like certain strong cheeses today, an acquired taste that people genuinely enjoyed? The sagas occasionally mention gifts of old butter, suggesting it may have held a certain value, perhaps as a sign of a well-stocked and prosperous household. The most extreme form of butter preservation, as we've hinted, was the practice of burying it in a peat bog. This created what archaeologists call bog butter. The anaerobic, acidic environment of the bog prevented the butter from going rancid in the typical way. Instead, a process called a dip-oce formation occurred, where the fats converted into a waxy, soap-like substance. The resulting product had a very strong, pungent, and often unpleasant smell, but it was incredibly well preserved. Hundreds of samples of bog butter, some thousands of years old, have been recovered from bogs across northern Europe. When you find one of these caches, you're uncovering a time capsule, a lump of fat that tells a story of foresight and desperation. Would you have actually eaten it? The consensus is yes. While the taste would be challenging, to say the least, in a time of scarcity, a large, preserved block of pure calories, no matter how strange its flavor, would have been a priceless treasure. So as you scrape a sliver of yellow tangy, slightly cheesy smelling butter from the barrel, you're not just preparing your meal. You are tasting time itself, the slow, inevitable chemical decay that you have managed, through ingenuity and a tolerance for strong flavors, to hold at bay for one more season. Sometimes in the darkest heart of winter, when your standard fare of salted fish and rancid butter seems almost unbearably monotonous, you might be treated to a regional specialty. If you find yourself in Iceland, a land of volcanic rock and scarce resources, you might encounter a food that is the absolute pinnacle of Viking Age culinary desperation and ingenuity. It's a dish that has become infamous, a food challenge for daring tourists today. But for your ancestors, it was a protein source born of necessity. This is hawk or lore fermented shark. The experience of eating it begins not with the taste, but with the smell. It's a wave of pure ammonia, so pungent and overpowering it feels like it's scouring the inside of your nostrils. It's the smell of chemical decay, deliberately harnessed to make the inedible edible. The creature at the heart of this dish is the Greenland shark, a massive, ancient predator that prowls the cold, deep waters of the North Atlantic. This shark presented a frustrating paradox for the early settlers of Iceland. It was abundant, a huge potential source of meat and with very few large terrestrial animals. However, its flesh is poisonous. The Greenland shark has no urinary tract, so it concentrates urea and trimethylenol oxide in its tissues to survive in the freezing, high-pressure deep sea. If you were to eat a piece of fresh Greenland shark meat, you would become violently ill, experiencing an effect similar to extreme drunkenness, followed by severe gastrointestinal distress. It was, in its natural state, useless as a food source. But the Vikings were nothing if not resourceful. Through what must have been a terrifying and unpleasant process of trial and error, they developed a method to neutralize the toxins controlled putrefaction. The process is both brilliant and stomach-turning. First, you catch the shark, behead it, then gut it. Then, you dig a shallow pit in the porous gravelly sand. You place the shark meat in the pit and cover it with more sand and gravel, placing heavy stones on top to press down on the flesh. The pressure helps to squeeze out the toxic fluids. You then leave it there, buried in its shallow grave, for 6 to 12 weeks, depending on the season. During this time, the urea in the flesh slowly breaks down into ammonia, and the meat begins to ferment and decay in a controlled way. After this subterranean fermentation period, you dig up the now intensely fragrant shark meat. The job isn't over. You then cut it into large strips and hang it in a special drying shed, open to the wind, but protected from the rain. It hangs there for another 4 to 5 months, during which time the wind continues to dry it out, and a brownish, crusty pellicle forms on the outside. Only after this long and odorous process is the hawk all ready to be eaten. The final product is a pile of small, chewy, half-white cubes of flesh. The taste and texture are as unique as the smell. The initial flavor is surprisingly mild, slightly fishy, but this is quickly overwhelmed by an intense, lingering aftertaste of ammonia and pungent cheese. The texture is firm and rubbery, requiring a good deal of chewing. It is, by any modern standard, an extreme flavor experience. There's a long-standing academic debate about whether hawkle was a common food or a true famine food, eaten only when all other store exhausted. The sheer effort and time involved in its preparation suggest it wasn't a casual undertaking. However, its ability to turn a poisonous waste product into a long-lasting source of protein made it an invaluable survival tool in the unforgiving Icelandic environment. A little-known fact is that there are 2 types of hawkle: the chewy, reddish meat from the belly, called gieli rock or glassy shark, and the softer, white meat from the body, known as sky hawkle. Both are equally pungent. As you pop a small cube of this infamous delicacy into your mouth, pinching your nose against the overwhelming smell, you are not just eating. You are consuming a piece of pure, unadulterated Viking ingenuity, a testament to your people's absolute refusal to be beaten by a hostile environment. It might taste like a chemical spill, but it tastes like survival. Once in a long while, the monotonous rhythm of your diet is gloriously interrupted. It happens on a day when the hunters return from the forest not empty-handed, but with the carcass of a deer slung over their shoulders, or when a wild boar, its tusks formidable even in death, is dragged into the village clearing. It happens when you decide that a young bullock has served its purpose and will now serve a better one in the stew pot. On these days, you get to taste fresh meat. The rarity of this occasion transforms it from a simple meal into a full-blown celebration, a moment of communal joy and a welcome respite from the endless cycle of salted and dried foods. The very concept of fresh is a luxury. In your world, most meat is, by necessity, preserved. The autumn slaughter provides a brief window of fresh meat, but the majority of it is immediately salted or dried for the winter. The only other sources are hunting and trapping. Hunting is a difficult and often dangerous pursuit. The forests are vast and dark, and animals like elk, deer, and wild boar are powerful and elusive. A successful hunt is far from guaranteed and is a cause for major celebration. Trapping smaller game, like hares and large birds like capercaillie, is more common and provides a small but welcome supplement to your diet. The children of the village are often tasked with setting snares and checking them daily, their small contribution to the household larder. When a large animal is brought back, the entire community gets involved. The butchering is done swiftly and efficiently, a skill every adult possesses. No part of the animal is wasted. The prime cuts of meat are set aside for roasting, a cooking method reserved for these special occasions. A large spit is set up over the long fire, and chunks of venison or pork are skewered and slowly turned over the glowing embers. The smell is intoxicating, a rich, savory aroma that fills the longhouse and makes your mouth water in anticipation. It's a smell so different from the usual fishy, smoky, briny air that it feels like an event in itself. As the meat roasts, the less desirable cuts the tougher muscles. The organ meat, the bits clinging to the bones, are chopped up and thrown into the great cauldron. This creates a rich, flavorful stew, a significant upgrade from your usual thin porridge. The heart, liver, and kidneys are prized for their nutritional value and are often cooked and eaten right away by the hunters as a reward for their efforts. The blood is carefully collected in a bucket. You will mix it with flour, suet, and perhaps some herbs to create a type of blood pudding or sausage, which is then boiled or fried. It's a way to capture every last drop of protein and iron from the animal. The bones themselves are a treasure. After the meat has been stripped from them, You will crack them open with the back of an axe to get at the rich, fatty marrow inside. You might suck it directly from the bone, or you might scoop it out and add it to the stew, where it will melt and add a deep, savory flavor and a wealth of calories. Even after that, the bones are not discarded. You will boil them for hours, or even days, to create a thin but nutritious bone broth. Historians are still debating the full extent of wild game in the average Viking's diet. While the sagas are full of heroic hunting stories, archaeological evidence from many farmsteads suggests that the bulk of the meat consumed came from domesticated animals like sheep, goats, and cattle. It's likely that hunting was more of a supplementary activity, an opportunistic pursuit, rather than a primary food source for most settled farmers. The exception might be the powerful chieftains and their retinues who had the time and resources to engage in hunting as a leisure activity. A weird little detail is that Vikings were also known to eat horse meat. This practice had deep roots in their pagan religious rituals, but it became a point of contention and was strongly discouraged when Christianity began to take hold in Scandinavia, as it was seen as a barbaric, heathen custom. So as you sit by the fire, gnawing on a roasted ribbon, savoring the rich, game-y flavor of fresh venison, you understand that this is more than just a meal. It's a moment of abundance in a life of scarcity, a reminder of the wild bounty the world can offer, and a taste you will remember and crave through the long, salty months to come. You share your home with your food. This is not a metaphor, it's a simple statement of fact. The same roof that protects you from the wind and the rain also shelters the animals that are the lifeblood of your farm. Your livestock are not just a distant herd in a faraway field, they are your cohabitants, your neighbors, a constant living, breathing presence at one end of your longhouse. This proximity creates a unique and intimate relationship with the animals you will eventually eat, a relationship built on a foundation of mutual dependence and a complete lack of modern sentimentality. The cast of characters in your domestic menagerie is small but vital. You have a few sheep, prized for their wool as much as their meat. Their thick, greasy fleece is the raw material for the clothes on your back and the sails on your ships. You have a handful of goats, hardy and adaptable creatures that can survive on rough grazing and provide a steady supply of milk, which you drink fresh or turn into sour cheese. You have a pig or two rooting around the edges of your settlement, efficient converters of scraps and leftovers into precious fattened pork. And most importantly, you have your cattle. An ox is your tractor, the engine of your agricultural world, its immense strength used to pull the your simple plow through the heavy soil. A milk cow is the heart of your dairy production, the source of your milk, sky-earned rancid winter butter. These animals are your most valuable possessions, the measure of your wealth and your security against famine. During the summer months, the animals are put out to pasture in the common grazing lands around your settlement. This is a time for them to fatten up, enjoying the relative abundance of fresh grass. But as winter approaches, you face a stark choice. You can only afford to keep a small breeding stock alive through the winter, as feeding them requires you to dip into the precious stores of hay you spent the summer cutting and drying. The rest must be slaughtered. This autumn slaughter is a crucial event. It provides that brief, welcome glut of fresh meat. But it is also a somber, calculated decision about which animals will live and which will die. The ones chosen to survive are brought into the longhouse to wait out the cold. Life in the longhouse is a shared experience. As you try to sleep at night, you hear the soft chewing of a cow ruminating, the occasional bleat of a sheep, or the grunt of a pig. The smells of the barnyard are the smells of your living room. There's an ongoing debate among archaeologists about the exact layout and division of space within the longhouse. While some reconstructions show a clear, low-walled partition between the human and animal sections, others suggest the division was far more fluid, especially in smaller, less prosperous households. It's entirely possible that on a particularly cold night, a prized ewe or a newborn calf might be brought right up to the fire for warmth. This close cohabitation had practical benefits beyond simply protecting the animals. As mentioned, their collective body heat was a significant source of warmth, reducing the amount of precious firewood you needed to burn. Their manure was also a valuable resource. It was carefully collected and, once rotted, spread on the fields as fertilizer, a vital step in replenishing the nutrients in the soil. A curious and slightly stomach-turning detail uncovered through archaeological analysis of soil from longhouse floors is the presence of certain parasites that are common to both humans and livestock. This suggests a level of cross-contamination that would be unthinkable today. You and your cow were not just neighbors, you were sharing a microbiome. This intimacy with your food source meant you knew your animals individually. You knew which cow was the best milker, which sheep had the finest wool, and which pig was the fattest. But this familiarity did not translate into a modern, pet-like affection. An animal was a resource, a walking pantry. When it came time to slaughter the cow that had lived with you all winter, you would do so with practical efficiency, not with tears. It was the natural, unchangeable order of things. For a few glorious, fleeting months in the summer, the world around you explodes into a riot of green and color. The oppressive gray of winter is banished. The ground softens, and the landscape, which for so long was a source of hardship, suddenly becomes a vast, wild garden. This is the season of foraging, a frantic, joyful, and absolutely critical period of gathering. Every edible leaf, root, berry, and nut that you can find is a precious gift of calories and, more importantly, a burst of fresh flavor and vitamins that your body has been craving for months. You, your family, and everyone else in the settlement will spend a significant portion of the long summer days scouring the forests, meadows, and shorelines for these wild treasures. The stars of the foraging season are the berries. The Scandinavian forests are rich with them. You find bilberries, the wild, more intensely flavored cousin of the blueberry, growing on low bushes. You gather tart, ruby reed on berries, which are a perfect accompaniment to the rare meal of fresh meat. You might even find cloudberries, a rare and prized delicacy that grows in marshy, boggy areas. These gold of the moors have a unique, honey apricot flavor and are a true luxury. Every child learns from a young age which berries are safe to eat and which are poisonous. You gather them in woven baskets or wooden buckets, your fingers stained purple and red from the juice. A portion of them are eaten fresh, a sublime, sweet treat after a winter of salty, sour, and bland flavors. But the majority are preserved, either by drying them in the sun or by mashing them into a pulp and storing them in barrels, where they will ferment slightly and keep through the winter. Alongside the berries, you gather a wide variety of wild greens and herbs. You pick wild garlic, its pungent leaves adding a welcome kick to your stews. You gather nettles carefully to avoid their sting which, when boiled, lose their sting and become a nutritious green, similar to spinach. You find dandelions, sorrel, and wild angelica. The leaves, stems, and roots of these plants are all used, either fresh in a sort of boiled salad, or dried for later use as a flavoring or a medicinal tea. This practice of foraging for wild greens is confirmed by archaeological findings. The analysis of Viking Age coprolites often reveals the pollen and seeds of these wild plants, providing direct evidence that they were a regular part of the diet, not just a famine food. The forests also provide nuts, particularly hazelnuts. In the autumn, you will shake the hazel trees, gathering the fallen nuts and storing them in their shells. They are a fantastic source of fat and protein, a dense, portable snack that will keep for months. On the shorelines, you have another source of wild food seaweed. Certain types of seaweed, like dulse, are edible and rich in minerals. You gather it from the rocks at low tide, then dry it until it's brittle. You can then chew on it as a salty snack or crumble it into your stews to add a savory, umami flavor. There's a persistent debate among historians about the role of mushrooms in the Viking diet. While the forests are full of them, many are poisonous, and telling the difference requires expert knowledge. Some sources suggest that Vikings were wary of mushrooms, associating them with the supernatural. However, it's likely that some well-known, easily identifiable edible mushrooms, like chanterelles, were gathered uneaten. A fascinating, unslightly weird detail is the evidence for the consumption of bog cranberries and other plants that thrive in acidic, peat bogs were not just places to bury butter. They were also ecosystems that provided unique food sources. The acidic water of the bog naturally preserves these berries, and you could harvest them long after they would have rotted elsewhere. It's a testament to the Vikings' incredibly detailed knowledge of their local environment. They understood the unique properties of every type of landscape, from the high mountain pastures to the low-lying bogs, and they knew how to exploit them for every last calorie. So as you walk through the sun-dappled forest, your basket heavy with berries and your hands fragrant with wild garlic, you feel a sense of profound connection to the land. This is the time of plenty, the time when the world feels generous. Every handful of berries is a small rebellion against the tyranny of the salt barrel and the porridge pot. While the wild bounty of the forest and shore provides a welcome seasonal boost, you can't rely on foraging alone. The foundation of your non-porridge diet comes from a small, humble patch of cultivated land near the longhouse. This is your kitchen garden, or Calgary. It's not a sprawling field of diverse and colorful vegetables like a modern allotment. It's a small, practical, and intensely managed plot dedicated to growing a limited range of hardy, reliable crops that can survive the short, growing season and provide some semblance of vegetable matter for your stews. This garden is your bastion against a diet composed entirely of grain, fish, and meat. It's a source of texture, if not always of vibrant flavor. The stars of your garden are a cast of hardy, unglamorous, but dependable characters. You grow members of the brassica family like a primitive form of cabbage and kale. These are tough, leafy greens that can withstand a light frost. You grow root vegetables, primarily turnips and possibly parsnips. These are prized for their ability to be stored in a root cellar, a simple pit dug into the ground for a portion of the winter. Onions and garlic are also essential, providing a pungent, savory base for your cooking. They are easy to grow and store well when dried and braided. The most important crop in your garden, however, is probably the field pea or the fava bean. These legumes are a nutritional powerhouse. They are rich in protein and, crucially, they have the ability to fix nitrogen in the soil, which helps to keep your garden fertile year after year. The work in the garden is relentless during the growing season. The soil must be tilled by hand, using simple tools like a hoe or a digging stick. You are in a constant battle with weeds, which compete with your precious crops for sunlight and nutrients. Pests, from slugs to caterpillars, are another constant threat. The entire family is involved in this work. The children are tasked with weeding and carrying water, while the adults handle the heavier tasks of planting and harvesting. There is no concept of gardening for pleasure. This is pure, unadulterated subsistence farming. The historical evidence for these gardens comes from a variety of sources. Archaeologists have found the preserved seeds and pollen of these cultivated plants in the soil of Viking settlements. The analysis of sesbitescent coprolites also confirms their consumption. Furthermore, the Old Norse language itself gives us clues. The existence of words like Calgary cabbage garden and specific names for vegetables like NP, the Arleek onion demonstrates that these were familiar and important parts of their world. There is an ongoing scholarly discussion about the variety and extent of Viking horticulture. The traditional view is that it was very limited, focused on a few key hardy crops. However, some recent research, particularly from sites in the British Isles where the climate was milder, suggests that Viking settlers may have adopted a wider range of vegetables from the local populations, including carrots and celery. It's a reminder that the Viking diet was not monolithic. It varied significantly based on geography and local conditions. A particularly humble but important detail is the cultivation of flax. While you don't eat the flax plant itself, it's a vital part of your garden. The fibers from its stem are used to make linen, a strong and versatile fabric used for clothing, sails, and rope. The seeds, linseed, are also valuable. They are rich in oil and could be pressed to produce a simple linseed oil, or they could be added to bread or porridge for an extra nutritional kick. So your small garden is a model of efficiency, producing not just food, but also the raw materials for clothing and tools. As you stand in your cowgare at the end of a long summer day, your back aching from weeding, you look over your rows of hardy greens and sturdy root vegetables. It's not a beautiful sight, not a riot of color and flavor, but it is a reassuring one. Each cabbage head, each string of onions, is a small victory. It's another ingredient for the perpetual pot, another texture to break up the monotony, and another small proof of your ability to tame a small patch of this wild, unforgiving land. The first snow of the season is a beautiful but terrifying sight. It dusts the dark pines with whitened silences, the landscape under a soft, muffling blanket. But for you, it is not a symbol of peace, it is the closing of a door. It marks the beginning of the long, dark, hungry months, the time when you are thrown back entirely on your own resources. The success or failure of your entire year, your planting, your harvesting, your foraging, your preserving is about to be tested. The anxiety begins as a low hum, a quiet calculation in the back of your mind as you stare at your winter stores. It's a feeling that will grow into a gnawing, palpable fear as the winter deepens and the food supplies begin to dwindle. Your larder is a collection of barrels, chests, and hanging things. You have barrels of salted herring, their brine turning the fish a pale, fleshy pink. You have a barrel of skyred soreness a welcome, a sharp addition to your meals. You have chests filled with coarse barley flour, the foundation of your diet. Hanging from the rafters are the dark, leathery strips of dried mutton and the stiff, board-like forms of stockfish. In a cool, dark pit dug into the floor, you have a small pile of turnips and onions. This is it. This is everything that stands between your family and starvation until the spring thaw, which is many long, dark months away. Life slows to a crawl. The world outside is frozen and hostile. Your universe shrinks to the smoky, crowded interior of the longhouse. The days are short, the nights are endless. You spend your time mending tools, weaving cloth, telling stories, and, most of all, waiting. Every meal is a carefully calculated act of rationing. The matriarch of the household, the HUS Freja, is the keeper of the keys to the larder. She is the one who doles out the daily portions, her face a mask of stern concentration. She knows exactly how much is left and how long it has to last. Her word is law. To challenge her authority over the food stores is to challenge the survival of the entire household. As the weeks turn into months, the variety in your diet disappears completely. The last of the dried berries are eaten. The fresh meat from the autumn slaughter is a distant, savory memory. Your diet narrows to its grim, essential core: porridge in the morning, a thin stew in the evening, with a piece of hard bread and a scraping of rancid butter. The stew itself becomes thinner, the chunks of salted meat or fish smaller and less frequent. You begin to feel the effects of the restricted diet. Bone-weary lethargy sets in. The lack of fresh vegetables and fruits leads to a deficiency in vitamin C, and the early signs of scurvy might appear: sore gums, aching joints, a feeling of profound weakness. Historians and archaeologists see the evidence of this seasonal hardship written in the bones of the Viking people. As mentioned before, the lines of enamel hypoplasia on teeth are a stark testament to these periods of nutritional stress. They are a physical scar left behind by the hungry winters of childhood. There is a continuous debate among scholars about just how severe this hungry gap was for the average Viking. Some argue, that with good planning and a successful harvest, a household could make it through the winter with adequate, if monotonous, food. Others paint a much bleaker picture, suggesting that for many, the late winter was a time of genuine, life-threatening starvation, where the weakest members of the community, the very old and the very young, would often perish. The sagas are filled with grim tales of famine winters, of sword times and wolf times, when the social order broke down and people were driven to desperate measures. While these are epic tales, they likely contain a kernel of truth about the very real fear that haunted the Viking imagination. As you lie on your sleeping platform, listening to the wind howl outside, your stomach feels hollow. It's a dull, empty ache that is becoming increasingly familiar. You look at your children, their faces pale in the firelight. Then you send a silent prayer to the gods that your stores will be enough, that the spring will come early this year. The fear of the empty barrel is the great, unspoken terror of the Viking Age. The moment you've been dreading has arrived. The barrel of barley flour is almost empty. The salted fish supply is down to its last few pieces. The spring thaw feels impossibly far away. Now, you must turn to the famine foods, the desperate, last resort substances that you would never dream of eating in times of plenty. Your hunger is so great that it overrides your sense of taste, your sense of what isn't food. Your first and most common recourse is to the trees themselves. You will make bark bread. It's a food of pure desperation, a way to stretch the last dregs of your real flour into something that can fill a stomach, even if it offers little in the way of real nutrition. The process is grim and laborious. You go out into the frozen forest with an axe and a knife. Not just any tree with an edible inner bark, or fulm, which is the layer just beneath the rough outer bark that transports nutrients. Pine, birch, and elm are the most common choices. You strip away the tough, dead outer bark, and then carefully peel away the pale, fibrous inner layer. You gather as much of this as you can carry and take it back to the longhouse. The inner bark is then laid out to dry near the fire until it is brittle. Once it's completely dry, you face the arduous task of turning it into flour. You pound it with a mallet or a rock, breaking it down into smaller and smaller pieces, and then you grind it in your quernstone, the same stone you use for your grain. The resulting flour is a coarse, fibrous, brownish powder that smells faintly of resonant sawdust. This bark flour is never eaten on its own. It's used as an extender, a bulking agent. You take the last handfuls of your precious barley flour and mix it with a much larger quantity of the bark flour. You add water and a pinch of salt, knead the gritty, fibrous dough, and bake it into hard, dark, unleavened flatbreads. The taste is exactly what you'd expect. It's bitter, resinous, and has the texture of chewy cardboard mixed with sand. It scrapes the inside of your mouth and sits in your stomach like a lead weight. But it is filling. It quiets the gnawing ache of hunger for a few hours. And for that, you are grateful. The use of bark bread is a well-documented phenomenon across many northern cultures during times of famine. And the Viking Age was no exception. The Sami people of northern Scandinavia, for whom it was a more regular part of their diet, had a sophisticated knowledge of which barks were best and how to prepare them. For you, a Viking farmer, it is a sign that things have gone terribly wrong. Historians and paleobotanists have found evidence of this practice in the archaeological record. Analysis of the residue on ancient cooking pots and in coprolites from periods of known hardship has revealed the presence of tree pollen and foam cells, a clear signature of bark consumption. There is a continuing discussion about whether this was solely a famine food or if, in some poorer, more marginal communities, it was a semi-regular part of the winter diet. The consensus, however, leans towards it being a food of last resort. A grim and little-known detail about bark bread is its effect on your digestive system. The high fiber content is difficult for the human gut to process. It can lead to severe constipation, bloating, and painful cramps. It fills your stomach, but your body struggles to extract any real energy from it. It's a cruel paradox. The food you eat to survive makes you feel sick, You are essentially eating wood, and your body knows it. As you sit by the fire, forcing down another piece of your bitter, gritty bark bread, you chew slowly and deliberately. Each mouthful is a struggle. This is not a meal. This is a battle for survival, fought with the most primitive of weapons. You are eating the forest itself, hoping it will be enough to keep you alive until the first green shoots of spring break through the snow. When even the bark bread isn't enough, your definition of food expands to encompass almost anything organic you can find. The desperation of the late winter hungry gap drives you out of the smoky longhouse and back into the frozen, skeletal landscape, not in search of game, but of anything, however humble, that might offer a morsel of sustenance. You become a true scavenger, your eyes scanning the ground for the slightest possibility of a calorie. The forest floor, the riverbanks, and the bogs become your larder of last resort. Your first target is moss. You find it clinging to the northern side of trees and rocks, a patch of stubborn green in the gray and white landscape. You scrape it off, its texture like a damp, rough carpet. Iceland moss, or FJ Allagro S, is a particularly prized variety, a lichen that is surprisingly high in carbohydrates. But you can't just eat it raw. It's intensely bitter and difficult to digest. You must first boil it repeatedly, changing the water each time to leach out the bitter acids. After this long process, you are left with a gelatinous, slimy gray mush. You can eat it as a thin, unappetizing gruel, or you can mix it with the dregs of your bark flour to make an even more desperate form of famine bread. The taste is bland and swampy, the texture slick and unpleasant, but it is warm and it fills your belly. You also dig in the frozen ground for roots. You are not looking for the cultivated turnips in your depleted root cellar, but for the tough, stringy roots of wild plants. You use a sharpened stick or the tip of your axe to break through the hard topsoil, searching for the roots of dandelions, wild thistles, or any other plant you know to be non-poisonous. These are boiled for hours to soften them up, then mashed into a paste or added to the perpetual stew pot, which by now is a thin, watery broth containing the ghosts of winters past. The flavor is earthy and often bitter, but it's something. The desperation can drive you to even more extreme measures. The sagas, while prone to exaggeration, contain dark hints of what people were forced to eat during the worst famines. They speak of people boiling undeeding leather, old shoes, belts, pieces of harness to extract a tiny amount of nourishment from the animal hide. The process would involve simmering the leather for days on end to break it down into a gelatinous, gluey substance. The nutritional value would be minimal, but it would be something to put in your stomach. There is an ongoing ungrimmed debate among historians and archaeologists about the extent of cannibalism in the Viking Age. While there is no definitive, widespread archaeological evidence for it, some skeletal remains from specific sites show cut marks and processing patterns consistent with butchery. Most scholars believe that if it did happen, it was an act of ultimate desperation, a taboo-breaking horror confined to the most catastrophic of famines, and certainly not a regular practice. It remains one of the darkest and most contentious questions about the Viking Age. A strange and pathetic detail of this period is the phenomenon of hunger stones. These were not a Viking practice, but from later periods in a similar climate, and they illustrate the psychology of famine perfectly. People would put stones in the cooking pot along with the other famine foods. The stones, once heated, would help the water boil longer and retain heat, but they also served a psychological purpose. The clattering sound of the stones in the pot mimicked the sound of real food cooking, and children were sometimes told that the meal would be ready once the stones were oft a gentle but heartbreaking lie to quiet their crying for a little while longer. As you return to the longhouse, your hands numb with cold, clutching a small bundle of moss and a few dirty roots, you feel a profound sense of defeat. This is not the life of a proud warrior you see in the sagas. This is the life of a scavenger, scratching a living from the frozen earth. You add your meager findings to the pot, and as the swampy smell of boiling moss fills the air, you pray for a sign of spring, for the sound of a bird's song, for anything to signal that this long, hungry night is finally coming to an end. You have reached the absolute bedrock of desperation. The bark has been stripped from the trees, the moss has been scraped from the rocks, and the leather has been boiled. There is one final, grim resource left to you, a substance you would never have considered food, but which your gnawing hunger not forces you to reevaluate. You will turn to the bones. Not the fresh, marrow-filled bones from a recent kill, but the old, dry, discarded bones from the meals of months past, the ones that were thrown onto the midden heap behind the longhouse, the ones the dogs have already gnawed clean. You will grind these bones into flour. The process is a testament to the depths of your hunger. You gather the old bones, the vertebrae of a sheep, the leg bone of a goat, the rib of a cow, and bring them into the longhouse. They are dirty and have been exposed to the elements for months. First, you have to clean them as best you can. Then, you place them in the embers of the fire. This is not to cook them, but to make them brittle. The heat drives out any remaining moisture and calcifies the bone, making it easier to break. After they have been roasted in the fire, you take them out and let them cool. They are now chalky and fragile. You place them on a large, flat stone and begin the laborious process of pulverizing them. You use a heavy rock or the back of an axe head, smashing the bones into smaller and smaller fragments until you are left with a coarse, gritty powder. This bone meal is then taken to the quern stone. You pour the gritty powder onto the stone and begin to grind, just as you would with grain. The sound is different, a harsh, grating, scraping noise, and the work is harder. The resulting flour is a pale, grayish-white powder, heavy and dense, with the texture of fines, thinner chalk dust. It has almost no smell, save for a faint, dusty, mineral aroma. It is, essentially, ground-up calcium phosphate. This bone flour is, of course, never used on its own. It is the ultimate extender, a way to add bulk and a phantom sense of substance to the last dregs of your real flour. You mix a small amount of your remaining barley or bark flour with a large quantity of the bone flour. You add water to create a heavy, clay-like dough that is difficult to knead. From this, you form dense, grayish patties, which you cook on the hot stones of the hearth. The resulting bread is incredibly hard and heavy, with a gritty texture that feels like you are chewing on sand. It has a strange, neutral, slightly tacky taste that coats your mouth. The consumption of bone meal during famines is a practice that has been observed in various cultures throughout history, and there is evidence to suggest it occurred during the Viking Age. Bioarchaeologists studying Viking skeletons have noted extreme and unusual patterns of tooth wear, far beyond what could be explained by a diet of coarse grain alone. The theory is that this excessive wear could have been caused by the highly abrasive nature of bread made with bone meal or other gritty extenders like and or sawdust. It's a grim picture, people, so hungry they were willing to literally grind down their teeth to fill their stomachs. There is an ongoing scholarly debate about the nutritional value of this practice. While bone is rich in minerals like calcium and phosphorus, these are not calories. The human body cannot extract significant energy from ground-up bone. However, some argue that there might be trace amounts of protein and fat left in the bone matrix, and that in a state of extreme starvation, every tiny contribution counts. More likely, its primary function was psychological. It created a substance that looked and felt like bread, and its sheer density in the stomach provided a temporary, if illusory, feeling of fullness. You feel the abrasive texture scrape against your teeth and gums. It is the most wretched thing you have ever eaten. It is the taste of the absolute end of your resources. But as it settles in your stomach, the heavy, inert lump, it quiets the pain of hunger for a little while. And right now, a little while is all you can ask for. In a world of questionable food, what you drink is just as important and often just as unappetizing. Your hydration comes from a limited and often dubious menu of options. Clean, fresh water is a luxury. The primary beverages that get you through the day are wheat beer, cloudy water, and the ever-presents are milk products that are a byproduct of your cheese and butter making. Each of these drinks serves a purpose, but none would pass muster on a modern dining table. Thirst, like hunger, is a constant companion, and quenching it is a matter of choosing the least bad option available. The most common beverage, consumed by everyone from children to chieftains, is a low-alcohol beer or ale. But you must not picture a frothy, flavorful craft brew. The ale of your time is a thin, watery, and often our concoction, brewed for its caloric content and relative safety rather than its intoxicating properties. It's made from your standard grain, usually barley. The barley is first malted, a process of sprouting the grain and then drying it to develop the enzymes needed to convert its starches into fermentable sugars. This malted barley is then mashed with hot water, and the resulting sweet liquid or wort is boiled. After it cools, you pitch in the yeast, usually the dregs from a previous batch, and let it ferment for a few days. The result is a cloudy, low-alcohol beverage that is safer to drink than water from a potentially contaminated stream. Even in small amounts, helps to kill off harmful bacteria. This small beer is your daily source of hydration and a significant source of calories. Water, of course, is also consumed, but its quality is highly variable. If you live near a clean, fast-flowing spring, you are lucky. You can drink deeply of cold, fresh water. But for many settlements, the primary water source is a shallow well, a slow-moving river, or a lake. These sources are often contaminated by runoff from the surrounding fields, which includes animal waste from your livestock. The concept of waterborne illness is unknown to you, but you know from experience that drinking from certain sources can make you sick. So water is often treated with suspicion. You might boil it before drinking if you have the fuel to spare, but more often, you simply drink it and hope for the best. The third pillar of your hydration is dairy. As we've seen, milk is a precious commodity. Fresh milk is a treat, but it spoils quickly. The most common dairy-based drinks are the byproduct of your other food production. When you churn butter, you are left with buttermilk. This tangy, acidic liquid is a refreshing and nutritious drink full of protein. When you make skyr or simple cheese, you are left with whey, the thin, watery liquid that separates from the curdled milk. Whey is slightly sweet but also has a sour edge. It's packed with minerals and is another important source of hydration, often consumed on its own or used as the liquid base for your porridge. The sourness of these drinks is, again, a sign of their safety. The lactic acid produced during fermentation inhibits the growth of more harmful bacteria. There is a fascinating and still debated topic among geneticists and historians concerning lactose tolerance in the Viking population. The ability to digest lactose into adulthood is a genetic mutation that is common in modern populations of Northern European descent. The prevailing theory is that this trait was strongly selected for in cultures that relied heavily on dairy farming. Vikings, with their dependence on cattle, were likely at the forefront of this evolutionary pressure. It's unlikely that everyone was fully lactose tolerant. For those who weren't, the fermented dairy products like sky or buttermilk and whey were a perfect solution. The fermentation process breaks down much of the lactose, making them easier to digest. So your sour milk drinks were not just a way to preserve milk, they were a way to make it digestible for a larger portion of the population. A little-known detail is what you drank from. While chieftains might have ornate drinking horns or even imported glass vessels, you would most likely drink from a simple wooden cup or bowl. These vessels were porous and difficult to clean thoroughly, meaning they would have harbored their own unique microbiome, adding another layer of complex, funky flavor to every drink you consumed. As you raise your wooden cup, filled with cloudy, slightly sour ale, you are not just quenching your thirst. You are consuming liquid bread, a safe and reliable source of calories that helps you endure the salty, monotonous diet that defines your life. There is one drink that holds a place of legendary status in your culture, a beverage synonymous with gods, kings, and poets. This is mead, the famed honey wine of the Vikings. It is the drink of Valhalla, the reward for fallen warriors, the liquid inspiration for the skaldas who composed the great sagas. In the popular imagination, mead flows as freely as water in every longhouse, with Vikings constantly guzzling it from massive drinking horns. The reality, as is so often the case, is far more mundane. For you, an average Viking farmer, mead is not a daily drink. It is a rare, expensive, and almost mythical luxury, reserved for the most sacred of rituals and the most magnificent of feasts. The reason for its rarity is simple. Its primary ingredient, honey, is an incredibly precious and difficult to obtain commodity. In the cool climate of Scandinavia, beekeeping was a challenging, unspecialized practice. You couldn't just set up a few hives in your backyard. It required skill, knowledge, and a bit of luck to manage a colony of bees through the long winter. More often, honey was obtained by bee hunting, a dangerous and arduous task of tracking wild bees back to their hives, which were often located high in hollow trees. This involves scaling the tree, pacifying the bees with smoke, and then cutting out the honeycomb. It was a risky business that could result in a swarm of angry bees and a nasty fall. Consequently, honey was a high-value item, more of a medicine or a potent sweetener than a bulk ingredient for brewing. The process of making mead is, in principle, straightforward. You simply mix honey with water and allow it to ferment. However, to make good mead requires care and precision. The honey-water mixture, called must, is a perfect breeding ground for all sorts of wild yeasts and bacteria, many of which can spoil the batch, turning its sour or giving it off flavors. A skilled brewer would use a specific strain of yeast, perhaps cultivated from a previous successful batch, to ensure a clean fermentation. The mead would be left to ferment for several weeks or even months, and then aged to allow its flavors to mellow and develop. A well-made mead could be a complex and delicious drink, with a rich, floral aroma from the honey and a smooth, warming alcohol content that could be surprisingly potent. Because of the expense and effort involved, mead was a drink of the elite. It was the drink of chieftains and kings, who had the resources to maintain their own beehives or to trade for honey. Ealhort offering his followers a horn of mead was a powerful symbol of his wealth and generosity, a way of binding his warriors to him in loyalty. The sagas are filled with references to the mead hall, the central longhouse of a chieftain, where the drinking of mead was a central part of the social and political life. There's an ongoing academic discussion about the different types of mead that may have existed. Was all mead the simple honey and water variety, or were there more complex recipes? Some scholars point to evidence of the GL in a type of mead flavored with herbs and spices, or mellow mel which was fermented with fruit juices. Like craft brews of their day, these would have been even more luxurious. The craft brews of their day, reserved for the highest echelons of society. A particularly fascinating aspect of mead is its deep connection to poetry and wisdom in Norse mythology. In the Poetic Edda there is a story of the mead of poetry, a magical beverage that grants the gift of skaldship and scholarship to anyone who drinks it. The god Odin goes on an epic quest, using trickery and cunning, to steal this mead for the gods and for humanity. This myth elevates mead from a simple alcoholic beverage to a sacred, transformative substance. It suggests that the altered state of consciousness produced by the drink was seen as a way to connect with the divine, to unlock hidden knowledge and creative power. So, on the rare occasion that you find yourself in the hall of a powerful chieftain, and the drinking horn filled with fragrant, golden mead is passed to you, it is a moment of profound significance. As you take a sip, the sweet, complex liquid warming your throat, you are not just enjoying a drink. You are partaking in a legend. You are tasting the wealth of your Lord, the magic of the gods, and the inspiration of the poets. It's a taste that is as far removed from your daily sour ale as the life of a king is from your own. Let's return to where we started the Viking feast. We've established that it was a rare event, a bright spark in a year of monotony, but now, armed with a more realistic understanding of your daily diet and living conditions, let's imagine what one of these feasts would actually be like. It is indeed a moment of glorious chaotic abundance, but it's an abundance measured by Viking standards, and the experience is filtered through the lens of your everyday reality. The noise, the smells, and the social dynamics are a far cry from a polite, modern dinner party. It is loud, messy, and intensely communal. The occasion is a great one. Perhaps your chieftain's son is getting married. For days, the settlement has been buzzing with preparation. The best livestock have been slaughtered, providing a bounty of fresh meat. The brewers have been working overtime, creating vast quantities of strong ale, and maybe even a precious barrel of meat has been broached. The longhouse has been cleaned as best as it can be, with fresh rushes spread on the floor to cover the dirt and grime. As you enter the hall, the scene is overwhelming. The long fire roars in the center, much larger than usual, with whole pigs and sheep roasting on massive spits, the fat dripping and sizzling into the flames. The air is thick with smoke, but it's the rich, savory smoke of roasting meat, a smell that makes your stomach ache with anticipation. You find your place on the long benches that line the walls. There are no individual plates or cutlery sets. You have your own personal eating kit: a wooden bowl, a wooden spoon, and a sharp knife. Your CX, which you carry with you at all times. The food is not served in neat, individual portions. It's brought out on large wooden platters or in massive bowls and placed in the middle of the table for everyone to share. This is trencherman-style dining. You use your knife to spear a piece of roasted meat from the platter and place it on a thick slab of bread, a finer, leavened loaf for the occasion, which acts as your plate. You eat with your hands and your knife, tearing at the meat, the grease running down your chin and onto your tunic. The noise is deafening. The hall is packed with people: your family, your neighbors, and warriors from allied clans. Everyone is talking, laughing, and shouting to be heard over the crackling of the fire and the din of the crowd. The chieftain and his honored guests sit at a high table, slightly raised above the rest. The drinking horns are constantly being refilled and passed around. The ale is stronger than your usual daily brew, and its effects are quickly felt. The mood becomes boisterous and drowsy. Boasts are made, songs are sung, and old stories of gods and heroes are retold with dramatic flair. It's a performance as much as a meal. There is a long-running scholarly debate about the etiquette, or lack thereof, at a Viking feast. While some historical accounts, often written by horrified Christian monks, describe the Vikings as brutish and slovenly eaters, this is likely an exaggeration born of cultural prejudice. It's more probable that there was an established, if informal, code of conduct. You wouldn't take more than your fair share. You would pass the drinking horn in the correct manner, and you would show proper deference to those of a higher rank. However, the scene would still be incredibly messy by modern standards. Bones are not collected on a side plate. They are simply thrown onto the floor into the rushes, to be cleaned up later by the dogs, who wander freely among the benches, hoping for a dropped morsel. A strange and often overlooked detail of the feast is its lighting. The hall is lit by the central fire and perhaps a few tallow candles, or simple iron lamps that burn fish oil. The light is flickering, uncertain, and casts deep shadows. This means you can't always see your food clearly. You are eating in a smoky, semi-darkness, relying as much on feel and smell as on sight. As the night wears on, and the ale takes its toll, arguments can break out. A drunken insult or a perceived slight can quickly escalate into a brawl. The sagas are rife with stories of feasts that end in bloodshed. Your chieftain and his housecarls are on hand to keep the peace, but the atmosphere is always charged with a certain volatile energy. As you sit there, your belly full for the first time in months, the warmth of the fire on your face and the strong ale buzzing in your head, you feel a sense of profound belonging. This is your community, your tribe. The feast is a powerful ritual that reaffirms the bonds that tie you all together. It's a chaotic, messy, and potentially dangerous affair, but it is the vibrant heart of your social world, a memory you will cherish through the next long, quiet season of porridge and salted fish. And so, the feast ends, the fires die down, the last of the ale is drunk, and the guests stagger home or fall asleep in the rushes on the floor. The next morning, you wake up not to the smell of roasting meat, but to the familiar smoky, everyday aroma of the longhouse. The brief, glorious interruption is over, and reality returns with the cold light of dawn. The true story of your life, and the food you eat, is not found in the boisterous chaos of the feast, but in the quiet, relentless rhythm of the days that follow. Your life is a story of survival, not of feasting. It is a testament to the incredible resilience and ingenuity of a people living on the edge of the world. Your diet, which by any modern standard is monotonous, bland, and often disgusting, is a masterpiece of resource management. Every food item, every preservation technique, is a carefully considered solution to a problem. The endless porridge is a reliable, efficient source of carbohydrates. The intensely sour sky is a brilliant method of preserving the precious nutrients of milk. The rock-hard stock fish and the heavily salted meat are portable, long-lasting proteins that can fuel a long voyage or see you through a harsh winter. Even the most extreme famine foods, the bitter bark bread and the chaki, bone meal, are a symbol not of failure, but of an unyielding will to live, a refusal to succumb to the biting winds and the empty larder. You have a deep, unsentimental, and profoundly practical relationship with your environment. You are not a passive consumer, you are an active participant in your own food chain. You understand the subtle shifts of the seasons, the properties of the soil in your garden, the best places to find berries in the forest, and the unique chemistry of the peat bog. This intimate knowledge, passed down through generations, is your most valuable inheritance. It is more precious than a silver arm ring or a well-crafted sword, because it is what keeps you and your family alive. The historical perception of the Viking diet is a topic that continues to evolve. For a long time, the field was dominated by the romantic image of the feast, drawn from the sagas. Then, as archaeology and bioarchaeology advanced, a more grim, survivalist picture emerged, focusing on the hardship and monotony. Today, the consensus among many historians is a more nuanced one. It acknowledges the daily grind and the constant threat of scarcity, but it also recognizes the moments of plenty, the regional variations, and the surprising sophistication of some of their preservation techniques. There is an ongoing scholarly effort to move beyond the simple feast or famine dichotomy and to understand the Viking diet as a complex, adaptable system that was constantly responding to environmental and social pressures. One of the most humanizing details to emerge from recent research is the evidence of care and flavor. The discovery of cultivated herbs like dill and coriander at some sites, and even imported spices like black pepper, suggests that even in a world focused on survival, there was a desire for flavor, for something to break the monotony. The practice of adding dried berries to porridge or a handful of wild garlic to us speaks to a basic human impulse, to make food not just edible, but enjoyable. Perhaps the most poignant evidence is the discovery of small, worn-out quern stones that appear to have been used for grinding spices or herbs, a testament to the small, everyday efforts to bring a little bit of pleasure to the cooking pot. As you go about your day, mending a net or turning the soil, the memory of the feast fades, but its lesson remains. Life is a cycle of scarcity and abundance. You endure the one, and you celebrate the other. Your food is not a reflection of a grand, heroic destiny. It is a reflection of your world, harsh, beautiful, and demanding. And in your ability to draw life from it, in your quiet, daily persistence, lies a heroism that is deeper and more profound than any saga could ever capture. The world around you begins to soften now, The hard edges of the longhouse, the sharp taste of salt and smoke, all start to dissolve into a gentle, hazy quiet. The rhythmic thwack of an axe on wood fades into the distance, becoming the soft, steady beat of a faraway drum. A lullaby for a world drifting off to sleep. You can feel the rough wool of your tunic becoming as light as a cloud, the cold, damp floor of the longhouse transforming into a warm, soft bed of moss and moonlight. The gnawing hunger in your belly is gone, replaced by a feeling of deep, restful contentment. The anxieties of the changing seasons, the fear of the empty barrel, they all just melt away like snow in the spring sun. You are floating now in a peaceful, quiet space between the sagas of the past and the dreams of the future. The boisterous laughter of the feast hall and the silent prayers of the famine winter are just echoes now. Stories whispered on the wind. Let the smoky air of the Viking Age clear, and breathe in the calm, clean air of your own quiet room. Feel the gentle weight of your blanket, a safe harbor in the peaceful sea of your sleep. There are no more chores to be done, no more porridge to be stirred. There is only this stillness. There is only this stillness, this deep and profound rest. You have journeyed far tonight, and now it is time to come home to your dreams.